My dad was a wild man, and he told me this story. See, when he used to drink and party, he told me this story about how he had an arm wrestling match with Ric Flair and beat him, and then he proceeded to drink with him, and then sung the national anthem to him, in which Ric Flair cried about how touched he was about him and his singing of it, which it goes in line with my dad during his drinking days. And everybody's, it's full of shit. He's full of shit, right? And me and my dad, when I was in the 5th grade, we went to a local SmackDown in Richmond, Virginia, where we saw Ric Flair, and we went in line. When we got up to the line, Ric Flair went, "Paul! Paul, is that you?" Woo! and he was like, strongest arms in the East right here. And started telling me, he's like, "How you been, you son of a bitch? How you been?" And he remembered my dad. And evidently, it was like one of those drinking things. And Ric Flair, it's common knowledge that he always does that. He goes to local bars. He was at this local Ramada Inn bar, where I think it was Renata Inn or something like that on Williamsburg Road, where there was bars every next door. There was a bar. And apparently, because my dad was a wild man that really nobody even knew, but they said it at my funeral, in which there's a different side that everybody saw of my dad, but there was a side of me inside him. And you'll hear it in the stories, he pulled out a chainsaw and chased everybody down at the pine wood after getting kicked out, and released German shepherds on people. And anyway, and he went to Star Search. And anyway, so apparently he was drinking, and Ric Flair had a bunch of these flight attendants from Richmond. We're right next to the airport, Richmond International, and he was drinking or whatever. And my dad always is kind of, what I'm guessing, my dad's always like, who is this guy? Fuck this guy. I don't give a... He ain't nothing. And apparently he got into where they were talking, and he was like, "Let's have an arm wrestling match." And I don't know that, but it probably is true. My dad was a powerlifting champ. Apparently he beat Ric Flair in an arm wrestling match, and he was like, sit down, let's have some drinks." And he kept giving them vodka and cherry, and they just kept nailing rounds. And my dad threw a pitch at him to sing at the WrestleMania, where Ric Flair was like, "I don't know, tell me, show me, Paul, speak, sing it. And my dad always did things like that, so he sung the national anthem, and apparently Ric Flair went, "That was beautiful, Paul. I'm touched." But my dad didn't know how that sounded, like it was some deranged cokehead that's drunk, that would cry about anything my dad says. But my dad didn't see it that way. He was like, he told me it touched him, and he cried. He'd never heard singing like that before, that much soul out of a white guy. And I didn't. But the funny thing is, when we were at the autograph signing, even though he wasn't even nothing, back then. I was in the Stone Cold era. That was my dude. And I don't even want to say, my dad wanted to go, and sure as hell, Ric Flair, right when we got about 7 people in front of us, he said, Paul, whoop, is that you?" He started freaking out. He was like, "Paul," and he said, "Strongest arms in the East right here. How you doing? So beautiful." And I can't remember what else he said. He's like, "Man, your dad is a strong man. He took on 5 men at this bar." Then, he's giving him up. He was making up stuff. And he was like, "You ever ask?" And my dad said, "You ever ask him about the singing?" He said, "No." He was like, "We're singing." He didn't remember nothing about it. He was like, "Oh, yeah, I don't know. I'm going to talk to him. I know the girl that runs the soundboards." And but it was the funniest thing in the world. And he ended up inviting my dad and me to, what was it? It it was apparent it was next to what was the Paper Moon, because he kept saying, there's a gentleman's club, Paper Moon, but I'm going to be drinking right next to that before, at 8, I'm gonna shop over to the gentleman's club, Pan Moon, and he couldn't say the word right. I remember, I was like, man, I want to go there, because hopefully the strippers will come out, and I'll witness seeing them, you know, as they're walking out of it, because I knew where it was. It was a shady place, but it was where he was getting drinks, and he invited my dad, and he said, you ain't gonna have to pay for nothing. Your boy can get whatever he wants on the menu and kick back. And I think my dad said, man, he's only, you know, he's, what was I, whatever age you are in the 5th grade, 9 or something. He's not. Whenever I go, the kids can come too. he was like, I don't care who I gotta pay, who I gotta kill. And after that time seeing him, was funny. I was like, who the fuck is Ric Flair? Because you know, it's during that time period where, you know, I knew of Hulk Hogan, but I thought he was a dweeb, and, you know, I liked Stone Cold, and, you know, I kind of like The Rock. I like Sacco and Mankind, right? Mick Foley. Who else? And I like The Undertaker. I like Kane. That was before he released, you know, his face and everything. And who else was it? Big Show. I never heard of Ric Flair. Everybody else did, and it was just this old weird dude. He kept doing that. It was later on that he came back that I realized, oh man, that was pretty wild. That my dad had a moment with Ric Flair and became, you know, drunk best friends for the night, to where he remembered him. Shoot, this had been almost 20 years after this happened that he saw him in the line. And it blew my mind. Everybody looked, and it wasn't, you know, like he was randomly, we came up to it and he said, no, he was like, he was sitting, he was kind of signing autographs like this. Not even looking at people. He was like, screw you, you trash. Like, he don't care. And like, people were asking him to do the woo. So we were like 15 people before he noticed us. And he was asking people to do, people were asking him, can you do the woo? And he was like, woo. He really didn't do it. And but like I said, when we were about 7 in to the line, he looks up and he's got these crazy shades on. And he's like, Paul, is that you? Woo! And like, freaking wears out. He's like, strongest arms in the East, strongest arms in the East. And so apparently they did have an arm wrestling match, but but Dad said no, that wasn't the only time. They had drank twice, because he came back, and Dad said he didn't do nothing, but he liked hanging out because, you know, he had all the girls, and he got to look, you know, he was married, and he just liked to live vicarious through him. And the other time was, apparently he got, Ric Flair actually got in a fist fight in one. I won't think of that. He got in a fist fight with this guy that, you know, he was trying to pick a fight. It was a big guy though, and my dad knew him, and they had jumped bars before, and he said Ric Flair got up and just cold clocked him, and just started, and just the guy just crumbled, and like, you know, it was just like a big, weak, big guy. And Ric Flair came back and started eating some chicken wings he had. So apparently, you know, the reason I mentioned this story is because I was watching today a podcast with Joe Rogan, and what do you know, Kurt Angle, and the other guy, he's talking about where he hung out with Ric Flair at your local hotel room. Still to this day, he's doing that. I almost want to like do a cameo and see if he still remembers my dad. But that was a wild story. he had told this, he had told me a bunch of wild ones. But it was also, when it was my dad saying it, he was not an honest man. He was a very truthful, like one of the most truthful people. He did not like lying. And that cost him friendship because he was just an asshole so much because he was too blatantly honest. Trait I started getting later on in life, but not in my early years as a liar. But it was just mind blowing that, you know, my dad at his funeral had all these people that told me these stories about him that everybody pushed off, but everybody knew it was Paul. And when he was a time of a wrecking ball and he was doing these things, he was people at the funeral, they were like, that sounds like Joey. And it was mind-blowing that age of my dad's life that nobody really even talks about. But yeah, apparently there was this time that my dad was only at that. Yeah, he was there because they do karaoke, but they weren't doing karaoke because Ric Flair was running the jukebox at the hotel, and I don't know where it got into the point where he was like arm wrestle, but my dad probably was like, you know, asking him how much he benched and stuff like that. My dad wasn't a very big man. He was just a big, compact, strong man. He was buff, but he was small. But he was a power lifter. He was a champion in Virginia at a young age. Very strong for that weight. But before I get into any message or anything, I was just talking about this funny story. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Have a good one.